Hello, everybody. There were so many people that signed up for this, and I think, Andrew, we both had COVID the last time we attempted this, so we didn't make it. But here we both are.
And here we are, and
Feeling better. Yeah.
better, yeah.
So, yeah, I think we had, almost 200 people that signed up. And as you know, it's live stream now and it goes right to YouTube. So lots of people will watch over the months. Yeah. So here we are. We ready, Rashawn?
Yep, all good.
Okay. So let's start with just coming into the body. I know I need to settle a little bit because Andrew had a bit of Zoom trouble on his end. So it was like, okay, what are we going to do if Andrew can't make it? So nervous system is a little tingly. So let's just take a moment. And just settle yourself inside, bringing your whole body, if it wants to come, into our space together. We're just noticing where you are in your nervous system right now. Wherever that is just fine. And lots of us here know each other, which is really lovely, making community together. Yeah. And then just getting a sense, we're going to spend time now with Andrew talking about harm reduction. So we're just taking that into the body. Harm reduction. And specifically with Andrew's model of harm reduction therapy. So how we work with the body in reducing harm. Being kind to the body and reducing harm. And really honoring the ways that bodies learn to survive. And one of those ways is addiction. Yeah. So we're really shifting the paradigm here. Healing the shame, welcoming body wisdom. And just notice how that shows up physically in your body. Healing the shame. And actually really even flipping it upside down and saying, isn't it amazing that bodies know how to survive? Develop these ways to keep us as safe as possible when there isn't enough safety. And then we have to engage them in this wonderful journey that Steve calls neural exercises, that we call things like felt sensing and meditation, to help them to shift into a more grounded ventral state in the body, if it feels safe enough. Yeah. Okay, so feeling your feet on the floor, coming back to the group. And I'm so looking forward to this, to being with you, Andrew. I'm going to spotlight both of us for the first while we have a dialogue together. Most people, this kind of thing that we do in the beginning. And then we come back to the group to be with all of you and to share with questions and comments. So I was thinking back to when we first had a conversation, you and I. It was quite a few years ago now, Andrew.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you were still running your, what did you call it? Center for Optimal Living.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So Will you tell us a little bit about you? I know you as a grandfather of harm reduction therapy. Wrote, I think, the first really concise book, right? You edited it with lots of other people that were doing the work at the time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I first want to say that it's wonderful to be with you again and to be with your community.
Yeah.
A felt sense, Polyvagal community is very close to my heart and my well-being. And so it's just wonderful to be able to share my work, myself, and to connect with you in this way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I want to say, I've been working as a professional with people that struggle with substances and other risky and problematic behaviors for my entire career. And I'll say more about that, obviously, but I came into the field right out of graduate school, having seen a number of patients in my training who were struggling with substances. And in contrast to the sort of prevailing at that time and still to this day kind of stigmatizing, really negative narratives and associations and assumptions about people that struggle with drugs, I found this to be just a wonderful, lovely, diverse group of people who were poorly treated, undertreated, mistreated. And, I ultimately felt that maybe I could make a contribution to improving the treatment of these folks. Fast forward, I began to experiment with breaking all the rules, the traditional rules about dictating terms to people and one size fits all treatment. I began to experiment with really meeting people as unique individuals and working collaboratively to figure out how we can do something together that's going to be helpful to them. And then in 1994, somebody told me, my mentor and really wonderful friend, Alan Marlatt, that I was doing harm reduction work. And so I have this amazing memory. You know how trauma, is indelibly marked in our minds. There's some like good experiences that have the same kind of, life-changing impact. And this was one of them. I have a memory of being out in my patio on the phone and Alan saying, "You're doing harm reduction." And that set me on a path of really drawing out what do harm reduction principles suggest for psychotherapy, for helping relationships. And that's really been my journey toward what I call now integrative harm reduction therapy. But about 15 years into that journey in my own personal therapy, I connected with an experience that I had when I was 15 that I call treatment trauma, drug treatment trauma. I had my own substance use issues, a series of bad LSD trips when I was 14 that led me to join voluntarily a treatment program that started out as a loving kind of community, and it turned, when I broke a rule, it turned to hell. I became the target of vicious, humiliating, kind of violent verbal attacks and
By the
uh,
staff?
by the staff.
Ooh.
This was a non-residential therapeutic community. You may know something about the old school therapeutic communities that were designed to break them down so we could build them up.
Yeah. Yes.
After battling, actually, after being shell-shocked, really, literally traumatized by the assault, I started fighting back and realized that they were not going to hear me, and I had to leave the program. And I really dissociated that experience, but it had a profound impact in terms of I began having panic attacks in front of groups. I mean, I was really traumatized. And but I got on with my life.
Oh,
And these many years later, I realized that that trauma had been working in me to bring me into the field, to sensitize me to what was wrong with it, and to really inspire me to create this compassionate, empowering, respectful, collaborative alternative, which is the work that I do now. So I'm a drug treatment trauma survivor. And also, I began talking about this publicly in an interview in 2016 with William White, who's an addiction researcher and historian, because I thought, I've had the luxury of many, many years of good psychotherapy to be able to really explore the roots and the impact of that trauma on me, and how many countless people out there have experienced similar and maybe even worse experiences and haven't ever had the opportunity to name it and then to get into some relationships that could begin to help them heal and grow and transform it in the way that I have. So, I think that that's something that we need to put out in the world. We need to be thinking about how bad treatments are not just ineffective, they can often, profoundly damage people or hurt people. So that's a little bit about me and my work that I want to share to begin with.
so it's interesting to note that you had the resources to get yourself out of there, right? And how so many people don't have those resources. And, everything you said, I think I could say myself about in terms of what shaped my own journey in this. We have a sense of that what was going on when we started out in the field was just so antithetical to really being with another human being and being curious about what's happening for them. It was all about dumping what we have been taught through this pathologizing model. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's interesting, what you just said, because it relates directly to how I understand the basic frame of harm reduction therapy, which is, it seems to me, and I'm coming to believe this more and more, that we've all been inculcated with these problematic narratives about what we call addiction and what we call addicts, people suffering from the quote disease of addiction. So there's that pathologizing disease narrative, and then close on the heels of it is this stigmatizing set of ideas and associations and so on that we've all internalized. And I think that they live within all of us and can uh, function as what I call social countertransference. That is, consciously and unconsciously, we make these assumptions and have these reactions that can really blind us to the person. And so it seems to me the first order of business is that we helpers need to be radically committed to examining our own biases, our own assumptions, our own emotional reactions, right? Um, uh, from what we've internalized, what we've been programmed to believe, maybe our own experiences with, our own lived experience with addiction or substance use or trauma, um, so that we can kind of stay on top of it. We can be curious about it. We can kind of contain it so that we can actually try to clear a space to be fully present with and open to the unique human that is sitting in front of us.
Yeah, so as you say that, for the people that are with us who know focusing and my teaching, that's Gendlin, right? It's clearing a space and allowing ourselves to really be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not have all the answers, but to be able to touch into our own vulnerability and our own places of shame and helplessness and struggle. And at the same time, to be able to create a safe container
mm, mm. And to the extent that we can do what you're talking about, kind of be fully present with our own felt emotional experience, bodily experience, and can be open to it, that we've kind of integrated. And maybe this is a lifelong process, but those empathic kind of evoked reactions become a source of empathy and compassion um, that enables us to really kind of be more and more fully present in an attuned way, which I think is really the foundation for safety. You talk about, Steve Porges talks about the need for safety. And how do we create a safe space for people who have had life experiences that have left them feeling really unsafe and unsafe to connect with themselves or with others.
Yes. And I could feel that. I mean, we've only met once on Zoom. You read my book, which was lovely, and endorsed it, which I really appreciated. But we've only actually met on Zoom once. And yet I think you can feel like we have a connection. And I think that connection and sense of co-regulation and safety comes from both of us reading that capacity in each other, that I feel this sense of safety with you in non-judgment and your willingness to risk being a vulnerable human being, or as Jean always called it, a shaky being. If people look into my eyes, they might see that shaky being. And yeah, in our profession, to be able to hold that and have it emanate from us, and at the same time to be a leader, because people that come to us, especially if you're struggling with addiction, feel lost, right? And so we need to also have this framework that helps to shape and contain the path that we're going to go on. So can you tell us about your framework, harm reduction psychotherapy? What is it?
So I think of harm reduction principles, the core principles, as being a kind of frame for the helping relationship or the therapeutic relationship. It's what helps create a frame for me. And I think of 5 core principles that constitute that frame. One is what Alan Marlatt, the man that introduced me to harm reduction, who was a giant in the addictive behaviors field from Vancouver, actually, originally, and working out of Seattle, called compassionate pragmatism. He thought that compassionate pragmatism is the philosophy that gets expressed in harm reduction practice. And the way that I understand that is that compassion is the impulse that we have to feel moved to try to reduce suffering or help people improve the quality of their lives. The pragmatic part is really the corrective or the counter to much of what's been wrong with addiction treatment, and I think therapy relationships more generally. The pragmatic part says that we need to constantly be evaluating what we're doing in terms of how well it's working, our policies, our principles, our therapeutic technique, and with a given person in each moment, so that it's a non-ideological, non-doctrinaire, or we might even say like constructivist approach, where we're trying to really attune to what we're doing with people and evaluate, how's it going? How's it working?
Process.
Yeah. So that's one. Then the key shift I was sort of talking about is this radical commitment to not meeting people with our agendas, with our values, with our presumptions. So that's where I think it really requires people to be rigorously self-examining. What's coming up for me? Is this about the person? Is this about me? And that really opens the door to the third principle, which is that we can really start where people are, around their motivation, around their unique strengths and vulnerabilities, right? And so it means, we want to join them around what's important to them without our presumptions. And I think that that really provides the foundation for the possibility of creating safety and alliance, right? Then ideally, we're joined around what's important to them, and we can begin goal setting in small incremental steps, rather than sort of the traditional quantum leap of a commitment to abstinence. It's like a commitment to running a marathon, when you show up for your first visit at the gym, right?
Yeah.
Let's figure out what's the first step, and then what's the next step to explore. And then we kind of work toward clarifying, it occurred to me one day, we don't need to know the destination to begin the journey. So the most important part is, establishing that empathic, attuned relationship. And then I think the final principle is collaboration. So I think a lot of traditional helping relationships have been very top-down, prescriptive, authoritarian, even from love. But the harm reduction frame is really attempting to kind of level the playing field between two human beings, one of whom is trying to be helpful to another one. And it's particularly, I think, important given what you said about folks that have been so disempowered. That is, that this stance is really about supporting people in getting in the driver's seat of their relationship to problematic behaviors, and then supporting them in figuring out kind of where they want to go. So that frame, I think, really is conducive to safety, collaboration, therapeutic alliance, and getting a relationship going that can be potentially facilitating and healing. Then I've mapped the therapeutic process in 7 therapeutic tasks. This is kind of my way of just trying to get my bearings. Like, what is it that we're working on? Is it alliance? Is it relationship as a healing, a central part of the healing? Is it self-regulation, self-management, assessment, working with ambivalence, goal setting, or strategizing for positive change, And in each one of those tasks, there are skills and strategies that we can learn, we can teach colleagues, we can teach our clients. That's kind of the model in a nutshell.
It's very process driven, much the way that the felt sense polyvagal model is when we work in an embodied way. So, what I love is I'd love to do some more with this with you, is that we're really talking about the psychological safety, but then what I love to do is bring in that neurophysiology. So polyvagal theory really goes so beautifully with what you're saying, right? Because we're recognizing that bodies are not going to shift into sobriety and a ventral state unless they feel safe.
Absolutely.
So we very much work with what's happening in your autonomic nervous system. Does your body feel safe enough to take this next step? And I know that you also do mindfulness practice, right?
Absolutely. So that's, in the third task of supporting people in kind of their own, strengthening their capacity to self-regulate, or even we might say to co-regulate, I think we do that both implicitly in our stance of vulnerable, attuned kind of empathy, right? And really reflecting back that we're with people and we're getting their experience. And even that, I think, is a collaborative process, right? So rather than imposing, you're feeling sad right now, I might really try to open and attune to what my felt experience is with a person and what's coming up for me in that moment. And then I might share that and wondering, am I on target? Is that, are you resonating with that experience right now? So that process is really about creating safety and also supporting people in kind of become curious about and clarifying what their own experience is. Then we can also, and I think that supports people in being able to identify and kind of regulate and tolerate their felt experience in the presence of a therapist who's attuned in that way. But yeah, I think mindfulness uh, absolutely is a skill, a capacity that we can teach. Focusing, I've actually done some training as well with, actually, there's a psychologist from Toronto, Peggy Kleinplatz, who works with sexuality. Peggy. I did some training with her, and she really specifically borrows from Genlin, the focusing technique, because obviously so many people that struggle with trauma and, problematic substance use have tremendously conflictual relationships with their bodies. Their bodies have been overwhelmingly hurt and feel like threatening and unreliable. And so people protect by dissociating or disconnecting from their felt experience. And then it kind of has a life of its own to some extent, or can drive the to want to numb or express through action, right? So
This is what I find such a gift in Steve's work, that we can really begin to appreciate, as I think, feminist therapists absolutely did years ago, that bodies have wisdom. There's a
Judith
reason.
Herman was, yeah.
Yeah, and it really, it's just so powerful for people to be able to shift into that paradigm. And I think he's brought something, in understanding the nervous system into addiction that's profound.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really profound.
So mindfulness, focusing, breathing techniques, grounding techniques, helping people feel more safe and secure in their bodies in the present moment is such a key.
And you're saying here too, this point you're making about how you are willing as the therapist to touch into the sadness or the grief or the fear that this person is sharing that's in them. You're willing to touch into that in you and to share, oh yeah, that place, that's hard to be with. And I feel that in you. And that, takes us into Jenlin's work with those levels of experiencing. That in experiential therapy, we're really coming into and deepening the process that the client is in within a safe container. So we're teaching them how to regulate. Right?
Yeah. And we're modeling. I mean, as we can allow ourselves to be more and more fully present in a vulnerable way in relation to them, we kind of maybe lead the way and show the way, and then encourage people to open in our presence.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, what I find, and I know you've been doing lots of teaching over the years, is that I'm really encouraging people to avoid, or to try not to get too caught up in having to learn the latest theory and therapeutic technique. And there's so much emphasis on this these days. And I find people are really anxious about it. It's like, I don't know about IFS, or tell me about sensory motor or what. And, they're all wonderful. But the most important thing is what we're talking about right now, applied to everything, not just harm reduction therapy, right?
Right, 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 right. So this is one of the reasons that I call my work integrative harm reduction psychotherapy, because first of all, because I think that all of these therapeutic traditions and techniques are really useful to some clinicians and to some clients or patients that they're working with. So I really think we need to honor all of these traditions. And if you're pulled toward Gestalt or you to IFS or SE or whatever, go for it. My particular integration is relational psychoanalysis, CBT, and mindfulness. But I want to bring in as many tools and techniques that I can offer to somebody I'm working with to figure out together what might be useful to this given person. So in a way, the alliance and the relationship, this relationship that we're discussing, is really the foundation and the context itself for healing, but then it's the framework within which we can then figure out what else can we make use of, can the client make use of to support their positive change process. And it could be journaling, it could be interpretation, and really kind of a deep exploration of the complex meanings of this problematic relationship to substances. It could be various trauma healing techniques. So the more we have kind of in our bag of tricks, I think the more possibilities we have to offer to folks to figure out together what's going to be most useful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we're both coming from that place of experiential therapy, that the process really is the foundation. And then down stuff, the theories and the concepts, they're all great.
Mm-hmm.
I want to welcome all of them in different ways for different people. So, so shall we open it up? Go back to our
Absolutely.
people. I think are putting some things in the chat, and so I'll bring us back. Okay. Here we are.
Great.
So,
Hi.
hi. You can raise your hand if you have a question, or Rashawn, if we have anything coming through on the live stream. How's everybody doing? Or you can put your question in the chat or comment that we can talk about. Somebody
Tom had a question, yeah.
Do you want to read it out, Rashawn?
Yeah, sure. What harm reduction strategies are useful now that many substances have unknown additives that cause overdose, withdrawal issues, and harm? For instance, opioid ODs have decreased in states that legalized marijuana.
Well, so, there are harm reduction strategies that specifically can target, the harms associated with a contaminated illicit drug supply, which is, it's the case, I know, throughout Canada and the United States and many other places around the world where there is no such thing right now as a safe illicit drug because of the contamination by fentanyl, xylazine, or tranq. And in fact, I last year I visited a harm reduction program, a wonderful program called Cactus in Montreal, and the fellow that was the organizer there was sharing with me that there are so many contaminants in the drug supply there. Nobody knows what they're using. So, I mean, it's a terrible artifact of prohibition, really, that, we've got a drug supply that is poisoned. But so what can people do? I mean, just from a harm reduction technique side, drug checking, testing drugs, actually Cactus and a number of other places are places where people can actually bring their drugs to be tested in a very sophisticated way to see what they're using. I think that there are other personal harm reduction strategies, like if you test your drugs at home and you have some sense of what you're getting, taking a test dose, a very small dose, to see what the effect is and so on. Certainly having Narcan around if there's an overdose, using with someone else, never use alone. There's actually a website called neverusealone.com. People can call into the website or the phone line, have somebody on the line, know where they are, and if they get into trouble, a call to 911 can be made. So these are some of the strategies that people can use. But I think of the harm reduction therapy approach is really about arming people and equipping people with strategies for managing their relationship to drug use, not just the techniques. So, and in fact, even the use of these harm reduction techniques. It seems to me the key, what I call almost the axis of change around problematic or addictive behavior is the urge, right? So we might think about that urge to engage in that behavior as being multiply determined by feelings, parts of the self, needs, the meaning and function that it plays in people's lives. But also to the extent that somebody is turning to a substance and actually finding it helpful in some way, over time, that behavior can become deeply ingrained as a habit, or networked, in neural networks in the brain. And so identifying the meaning and the function can be, and developing alternative ways of addressing those issues, alternative ways of creating safety, for example, or managing overwhelming feeling states could be one part of the process. But to the extent that the behavior has become deeply ingrained, it seems to me that we need to arm people with a behavior change kind of repertoire, right? How do you meet the urge? So that you can stop the action around the urge with mindfulness, with breath, with grounding techniques, sit with the urge, what Alan Marlatt called urge surfing, right? Turn down the intensity of the urge so that you can actually come back online and think. And now it becomes possible to think through your choices and think about alternative responses to that distress, right? So there's a whole set of techniques that we can teach people about how to meet the urge, how to reflect on, choices, and how to develop a kind of alternative repertoire for caring for oneself and responding to the distress in that moment.
We do that with focusing partnerships too. We really build in accountability with a listening partner, and a listening partner that's going deeply into embodiment with you. And then also use Patrick Cairns. Do you know his 3-circle practice?
Yes.
We added a 4th circle, Robert Ragucci, who's below you on the screen.
Hey, Robert.
I'll share it. I'll send it to you. It's just a path, a framework, so that when you're, lost and freaking out, you've got something there to hold on to that you remembered and you wrote down about what to do. So these are all such important things. Elspeth, you have what did you say here? Do you want to talk or do you want me to read it?
I can talk if you want, yeah.
love that.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Dr. Tatarsky. What I'm wondering is, as a young man of 15, when you were starting to go down the harm pathway, what would you have needed then, or what would have been helpful to you then?
Oh,
Yeah.
what a wonderful question. Well, so, I think I mentioned so I would say I was lucky to be a young adolescent, a young teen, and the tail end of the 60s. And for those of you who have kind of graying hair, you may recall that was a very, very exciting time culturally, politically, and I was right in the middle of the politics and the celebration and the music. And of course, drugs, mainly for me, cannabis and psychedelics were a big part of that. So I had some very wonderful experiences of community, of celebration, of fun. But then I had a series of really terrible LSD experiences. In the psychedelics world right now, they're saying there's no such thing as a bad trip, just a difficult trip. Well, I had some really bad trips. I mean, I became panicked and psychotic and paranoid, and it was just terrible. So I went into this program that was really an abstinence-only program, which is the dominant approach back then, and still to this day. It's really oriented on stopping the behavior, not necessarily on really understanding what the behavior was all about. And so, boy, if I had had a good polyvagal felt sense or harm reduction therapist who could really sit down with me and both help me figure out and process the psychedelic experiences that were so terrifying, what we're calling today psychedelic integration. If I had had a good, knowledgeable psychedelic integration therapist who could then also help me figure out why was I using substances at 13 and 14? What was drawing me to them, which I now have come to understand was a history for me of even earlier trauma. I mean, I grew up with three wonderful parents who were all very flawed and had very difficult life histories themselves. And I think, the chaotic and uncertain and challenging nature of my family life left me feeling very vulnerable and drawn to substances in an attempt to kind of cope or manage. So that would have been a really wonderful alternative if someone had been there to engage me in that way.
Thank you.
And I've been lucky to have found people who could do that for me over the course of my life since then. So.
Well, and maybe in a way, what you've done is to create what you would have liked to have received. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so beautiful, right? So many of us, right, in this work, I mean, we come into it because it resonates with something in us. And if we keep going, engaging in the process and doing our work so that we can become more and more grounded in ourselves, then we really can have something to offer to people. Anybody else? Have a look more in the chat. Are people feeling shy or tired or what's going on? Somebody asked about wanting to know more about your kind of program.
Mm-hmm.
Well, have you what book or what source would you suggest for people to find out more about the harm reduction integrative program?
Yeah. Well, so I wrote my book in 2002, and I started it really as a collection of psychotherapy stories from therapists that were working from a harm reduction perspective, but from many different backgrounds. So we have psychoanalytic contributors, integrative people, cognitive behavioral contributors. And so you kind of get, and I really ask people to write the stories in a very jargon-free, kind of a live way to try to bring the reader into what actually happens in the room between two people when they're working in a harm reduction therapy way. Then I collected my 10 stories, one of them is my own, and then I wrapped those stories in a whole other book, which is kind of introducing basic concepts and commentary on the cases. Now that book, 21 years later, I think is in some way more relevant than it was back then, because back then most people didn't really know, weren't really interested in, or had negative assumptions or associations with harm reduction. So that book would be a good place to look. I've also written a number of papers and book chapters since then. And if people are interested, you can come to my website, andrewtatarsky.com, send me a message, and I'm glad to send those papers out for free. So I've really, that book kind of describes the model in a general way. Some of the more recent papers really describe the model with a lot of specificity, discussion of cases. The most recent paper is where I'm really talking about also the personal emotional countertransference challenges that many of these patients raise for us as clinicians, and how, and I share my own experiences working with a number of these folks, and how I kind of think we can move forward managing countertransference in a way that it doesn't derail the therapy and so on. Now, I might also mention maybe a little plug. I actually have developed a 15-hour, 3-day training that I call Integrative Harm Reduction Psychotherapy Essentials. I've been doing it since 2007. My first one was in Poland. Since then, I've given these trainings in 20 countries, and I'm giving the next one, the first one in 4 years in person in New York in February, the 23rd. So if people want to come up or come down to New York and kind of join us, that should be a very exciting kind of immersion in the work.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Mina. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Mina.
Hello. Hello. This is so amazing. I'm in New York. Is it still open?
Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
we got some openings. Yeah.
Perfect. In many ways, you've turned poison into medicine, right? I mean, you've turned your karma into your mission. And it's so encouraging to hear what you're saying. I appreciate that very much. And my specific question is regarding addiction and traumatic brain injury. So, I mean, some of the things that you said about your family background is true for this individual I'm thinking of. In addition to that, he had a number of traumatic brain injuries and sudden cardiac arrest.
Wow.
So I'm just wondering if that adds a whole new complexity to, although he used, as a teenager, he drank a lot and he smoked a lot, but and he did all the drugs possible. But right now, all he's doing is pot. Because his body is not reacting to it. And I think he just feels a lot of regret about what happened in the past. So, and he's back in school, which is a big step for him. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, if I come and attend your class, will I be able to support him even more? Actually, what is some feedback you can give me on this situation?
Well, I would hope that if you come to the class, you'll be able to support him better. I mean, that's, There are two other, there was a question before about techniques, and I think there are two other, I think, basic techniques that come to mind that could be useful. First of all, in the traditional view of addiction and addiction treatment, there's a lot of binary thinking, right? If you're an addict or if you're addicted, there's one goal that is acceptable, and that's to stop. And it's as if, you either have the disease, you are addicted, or you're not. And I think part of the new paradigm or new way of thinking about it is that problematic substance use and other risky behaviors exist on continuums, a continuum of severity, even a continuum of benefit, a continuum of compulsivity, a continuum of awareness or insight, right? From dissociation to people being very clear about the reasons why they're using. So this shift to thinking about these behaviors on these continuums suggests that we need to assess and help people assess these behaviors in a much more nuanced way. It's not all bad, right? There's some good. People are getting some benefit, which is why they may continue to use, even while there may be major risks and an accumulation of negative consequences. So one of the techniques that I've come up with is what I call doing a microanalysis, really supporting people in looking in a very nuanced way at the way these behaviors, integrate with other aspects of their lives. Like, what's the typical pattern over the last week or month? When does it help? When does it become problematic? Right? Under what circumstances? Right? Emotional states, with people, when I'm alone, when I'm with family, so that we can then begin to help people identify that maybe this pot is helping this man in some ways, but in other ways, with a certain dosage, with a certain when he's in a certain emotional state, is not helping. So that microanalysis itself can point to small changes that people can begin to make in the direction of reducing the harm, right? Without having to require that you just stop, because if it's helpful to somebody, the odds are that people are not going to be ready, willing, or able to really consider stopping. So that can be very clarifying and very motivating and very empowering, because as people begin to make small changes, start a little later, use a little less. One woman that I'm working with now recognized she loves pot. She's been smoking it for 40 years. But she realized that it was really getting in the way of her quality of life, and that she began to notice that when she was upset, it actually just made her feel worse. And she hadn't recognized that until we began doing this kind of careful kind of assessment together. And so she became very motivated to not use when she's upset, but to work on, managing those feelings in other ways. The second idea that I have is what I call embracing ambivalence. To the extent that people have used substances or engaged in behaviors and they've been helpful, even while they may be very problematic, people are going to be understandably ambivalent about change. And in the traditional work, we've just wanted to talk with the person about the part that wants to change. And we've ignored the part that wants to keep using. So embracing ambivalence says, I want to invite all of you into the room. I want to hear from the part that hates it, that is terrified about, dying or ruining your marriage or whatever. But I also want to invite the part in that loves it. Let's hear from that part. Let's be curious about that part. And then we can maybe invite a constructive dialogue between those two parts about how might we respond to the needs of the part that wants to use, in a way that's more consistent with our other values or other considerations. And that can lead to kind of positive goal setting and so on. So those could be two very useful processes or conversations to have, I think, with everyone who's struggling with this. So I've started to kind of reframe the idea of addiction to thinking about this as a dilemma, often a very painful dilemma, but, one that folks are caught in, unless we can help them kind of get inside of those different parts of themselves, kind of unpack the meaning, the function, the motivations. And then it opens up a discussion of alternative ways of caring for oneself.
Yeah, and I think this is really important too, because we're actually having C. Sykes come, Andrew, in a couple of months, talk about how in IFS, they work with the addicted part and welcoming in that part. So we're really moving away from the power struggle, the top power struggle. And I think that's a lot of why people don't like working with addiction, because you end up getting into this power struggle and you end up being this person that's watching to see, are they screwing up? And if they do, they have to go back to step one. And it's just not fun, right? So.
Right. And it's such a powerful thing to reframe for people that, hey, as a harm reductionist, I don't presume to know why you're using. I don't presume to know what your goals should be. In fact, my presumption is if you're using, there's something positive that you're getting from it. And I want to really be curious about that. So I want to invite you in with these behaviors so that, we can kind of understand them together. And if there's some concern that you have, maybe I can be helpful around understanding that or helping you figure out some kind of solution to the concern. And right from the start, you talk, Jan and Steve does about creating safety, the importance of safety. I think from a kind of analytic perspective, we have this concept of the corrective emotional experience. If we can meet people in a way that's in contrast with, it sort of disconfirms negative assumptions based on earlier relationship experiences. That can have a profound kind of healing effect in creating safety. And I think that this harm reduction stance can often do that from the first contact. People are like, wait, I can be here in this relationship on my own terms.
Yeah, you can accept all of me.
Yeah. Yeah. And people often just tears start spilling down their eyes to have that experience of profound acceptance and respect and empathy.
And it also just goes so beautifully with the body, with the nervous system, because it's much more realistic in terms of, I love this thing that what did you call it? Where
Microanalysis.
Microanalysis. So you're going little step, moment by moment, in a very experiential way to help the person explore what this is all about, how it's helping and how it's harming, right? And that paradox can be held together. And then it's just really compatible with the nervous system, because the nervous system is not going to change. You're not going to go to sobriety if the body doesn't feel safe. Doesn't matter what you say to yourself, right? It's just not going to happen. And then that's the power struggle. It's like you're telling yourself this one thing, your therapist is telling you, you need to do this, and society is telling you that, and your body says, no, thanks. I don't feel I'm not going there. So you can yap away, blab away all you want, but I'm not going there. And then it's this terrible stuck place that nobody enjoys, right? We're over a bit. I mean, people feel free to leave, but I do want to ask this question because Greg, are you here still? Greg? Is asking, and Marina, did you ask the same thing? you unmute? Do you want to talk to us? And it's much better if you tell us rather than we read it.
I don't know if you can hear me. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Marina. I just
Marina.
want to say hello and thank you very much for being here. I do need to leave
Okay.
at this time. So
All right.
thank you very much. And I will join Andrew at another time, and we'll go to his website as well. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe Greg left, but Greg says, trauma experts are not by any means fighting to make trauma less psychological and more physical. We are simply educating the public about advances in understanding based on more sophisticated research. Pointing out new information is the nature of evolution in the scientific world. That's not the same as fighting to make anything happen. Somebody I think before had said, oh, Megan. Is Megan here?
I am here, Jan.
Okay, fill us in, Megan.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Do you want me to read it? I can.
Yeah, I mean, basically I feel like people get stuck in the origins of the condition, like whatever it is, you know what I mean? However it comes. And I feel like it's so multifactorial that it's kind of can be reductionist in many different, no matter how you slice it, kind of. And so I guess I'm just, maybe asking for some, like in the 12-step world, it drives me crazy. Like Jan, there's no reason that your work can't exist beautifully within the 12-step model, even if there isn't a buy-in to the disease concept, right? I also think like I mean, you might get some pushback from like the,
I don't think it actually does fit, Megan, but
well, that's what I'm asking Andrew to talk about, because that's what the comment was, that trauma experts kind of want to make it in the body, and then there's this other push to make it like versus the no, it's totally a physiological condition. And my point is, it's both. So I don't like the sort of barrier to entry in being able to integrate some of these models. That's what I'd like Andrew to talk on. Thank you.
great question.
Well, I actually think that the harm reduction frame addresses that in a very powerful and very beautiful way, because if, the first order of business is to not project our assumptions, our theories, our view of the nature of the problem on the person. We want to support people in clarifying what's true for them and what model, what language works for them. So within that framework, if someone really embraces the disease model as it's portrayed in the 12-step program and that version of a recovery process, let's support and affirm, that. So it's not about, I have problems myself with the disease model, but if my patient really loves that model and it works for him or her, I'm going to support that. So it's really about helping people find a model, a formulation, a language that really works for them. And so that, I think, maybe addresses the question. If somebody wants to go into the body, that's where we're going to go. If somebody wants to stay in a more psychoanalytic or, I can be Cahutian, I can be relational, I can be CBT, I can be very body oriented. And I'm going to try to figure out how I can use myself in a way that's going to be most useful for this person sitting in front of me, and to figure that out with the person. So it's a collaborative process rather than me. And that's why I have been trained a little bit in what some people call a constructivist approach. That is, that we and our patients get to construct meaning of the struggles that they're having that then suggests a focus in therapy that's going to be most useful to them. It's kind of how I,
Yeah, and I think we're talking about the difference, and it's a big thing to distinguish between how we are with another person we're sitting with who's telling us this thing's working for me. Of course, we respect that, but that's different than thinking about it conceptually.
you know,
Okay, we have to
Hey.
go. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. Honestly, this is one of the embodied dialogues I've enjoyed the most to be with you.
well, and I've really enjoyed it with you and your community. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
And all the best to you in your wonderful work and your contribution, really. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Be well, everyone.
Well, everybody, and see you next month for Ruth Lanius is coming to join us. Ruth Lanius is a world-class researcher in trauma. She works closely with Bessel van der Kolk. Really a wonderful thing to have her join us next time. So we'll see you then. Okay, bye for now. Thank you for coming.